Welcome to our weekly Church on the Rock podcast. For more information, visit us at churchak.org, download our Church on the Rock AK app, or like us on our Facebook page. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy our weekly podcast.
We are in this series called Filters. They are the lenses that we look at life through, the things that shape the way you see the world, the way you see yourself, the way that you see God. Now, I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a new Facebook picture going around with the upside down plates and bowls. I think we have it here. And just go ahead and read that. All of these plates are flipped upside down except one. When you see that one, they're all right side up. How many of you, they flipped for you? Okay, it says you have an extremely high IQ if they flip. How many of you, they flipped for you? Yes, I see that hand. I said, it's crazy. I've been driving my girls nuts with it, and you can't unsee it until you look away for a moment and then come back to it. Some of you are still trying. Don't have a seizure or something. It's so weird. It's freaking me out. But it's all about perception and perspective. And really, that's what we're dealing with in this series called Filters. My title today is No Pain, No Gain, which isn't my favorite saying. My favorite saying is no pain, no pain. That one's much better. If you're the note-taking type, let me give you a few phrases that we're going to thread together over the next few moments. The first one is escape room. The second one is Jesus, take the wheel. Yes. The third one is you got to fight for your right. Period. The next one is bad attitude. And the last one is they're watching. Just sounds creepy if you say it that way. It doesn't have to be. They're watching. It's like my parents are watching a game, but if you say they're watching, then it's creepy. Okay. You ready? Really? One person's ready? Is that Cora? Good job. Are you ready? Yes. All right. Good. Then I guess we'll keep going. Escape room. I don't know about you, but I'm guessing your experience has been similar to mine. This has been a bizarre year. It's been a challenging year in a whole bunch of ways. I've started to describe 2020 like a game of escape room, but there isn't actually an escape. Like, you could get all the right answers and you're still stuck in it. It's just been like, is this going to continue any longer? And the truth is, it's changing the way that we live in the world. It's changing the way that we shop. It's changing the way that we worship. It's changing the way that we greet one another. Like here at Church on the Rock, we used to always greet with a holy kiss. And now, just kidding. It's in the Bible. You can look it up later. It's changing the way we greet one another. It's even changing the way that we play. In fact, my girls are into Legos right now, which means my wife and I are into wearing our shoes through the house all the time because stepping on Legos without shoes on in the dark is from the devil. But they're into Legos and they're building all kinds of things. The other day I was sitting on the couch and I was listening to them play, and one of my girls says this. She says, I am opening a Lego store. So she built a Lego store out of Legos. It's like Inception, but with Legos. I built a Lego store, and then she follows it up with this statement. The store is now open, but you can't come inside. You have to shop online. What? Like, she would have never said that 5 months ago or however many years it's been since this started. It's changing the way that we see things. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I have. Often when there are difficult seasons in life, that's what we call them, seasons, right? This is just a challenging season. And what we really mean when we say that is that this is temporary, it's not permanent, this too shall pass, right? And there's a problem with primarily looking at pain and suffering, hurts, wounds, and losses in our life as strictly temporary. There's actually a couple of problems with seeing them that way. One is that pain and suffering is not only inevitable in life, it seems to be rather persistent. If you've been around long at all, you know that these seasons come, and they seem to come frequently. The second issue is this, that my goal becomes just getting past it rather than growing through it. Listen, if I can just survive and get out the other side of this, then I can begin to live life again. And yet the reality is that God is present right now in it. And He never wastes time. Time is extremely valuable to God, not because He needs it, but because it is the mechanism through which you and I experience transformation. It's through time that He transforms us. So He never wastes time, and we find ourselves in these seasons that we're just waiting to be over. I've told the story before about the young boy who finds the ball of magical silver thread out in the woods, and this old magician tells him that every time you pull the thread, you get to skip parts of life. The more you pull, the more you skip. And so the boy thinks this is a wonderful gift because he has school the next day. And so he goes to bed, he gets up in the morning, he goes to school, and he's going to just pull it enough because nobody wants to be in class. He just wants to be at recess. And so he pulls it, and boom, there they are at recess. And then class starts again, and boom, there he is in the afternoon playing and doing what he wants. And as the story goes, over time, he pulls it just to be done with school and enjoy the summer instead of the school year. And then he pulls it just to be done with school altogether. And then he meets a young lady, but he doesn't want to wait any longer. And so he pulls it until they're married. And then they have kids, and he just wants some sleep. So he pulls it, and they're teenagers. And he's like, whoops, and he pulls it more. And by the time he gets to the end of life, he is back in the woods at the place where he found the ball of silver thread. And he describes how quick life went by, and the old magician says to him, that's because life is what happens in between the pulls. And often we just want to skip all of it, and yet God is present in it. We begin to long for personal comfort rather than looking for the character development that God is after. Don't get me wrong, there are lots of situations that you should escape if at all possible. Going to CrossFit, for example. There are lots of things that you actually should escape from if at all possible. What I'm talking about are those situations that are inescapable, those moments when you and I find ourselves unable to escape from the pain or the suffering that we are in. And what we really need to know is, am I missing out on the things that I should be gleaning from? Because sometimes you can't see what's growing in the soil of adversity until the time for the harvest has come. Which brings me to Jesus Take the Wheel. Kitri's Oma, her grandmother, you've heard me share about her before, but grew up in the Netherlands. In fact, she grew up in the Netherlands during the time of World War II and the Nazi occupation. The Dutch did not believe that the Germans would ever attack them or occupy their country. They had been kissing cousins, great friends for a really long time, until the day came on May 10th, 1940, when German soldiers dressed up in Dutch outfits and came into the Netherlands and occupied. Oma tells the story in her book about those experiences during that time. At first, it wasn't so bad for the first couple of years because they had plenty of resources, but eventually the Germans were cut off from all of their supply lines, and so they began to plunder and pillage the Netherlands. And the Dutch suffered the consequences right as winter was coming. Eventually, even things like warmth from a fire in the wintertime were luxuries that most people did not have access to. But you could tell who was working with the Nazis. They called them land watchers, Nazi sympathizers. You could tell because those individuals still had pickets on their fences in front of the house. You know why? Because someone was providing firewood for them, but everyone else was burning their furniture, burning the pickets off of their fences, burning every tree out in front of their yard. They were burning anything they could get their hands on just to stay warm and to cook through the winter because the gas was turned off. They were being absolutely pillaged. In fact, she tells the story of how they would go at night to the homes of these land watchers, Nazi sympathizers, and steal the pickets off of their fences so that they could stay warm during the winter, and they didn't feel bad at all about it, she says. In fact, on 2 occasions, the Nazis showed up at their door, pounding on the door, demanding to be let in. On the second occasion, they took Oma and put her in prison while she was pregnant with Khitri's mom. That's how recent these events are. Eventually, she would get out of prison there, and 5 years later, the war was nearing an end, and she describes the experience they had as the war was coming to an end. It was the end of March. The Allied armies had crossed the Rhine and marched to Berlin. Everyone knew that the end of the war was near. All of us, even the Germans, longed for peace, though some were so fanatically enslaved to Hitler that they fought till the very end. They rounded up many underground pockets and sent them to concentration camps. Hans, Opa's brother, was one of them, and to our great sorrow died 2 days after the war. He left a wife and 4 children behind. But also this month, with its sorrow past, a week more and we were free. The war had lasted 5 years for us, minus 2 days. There are so many books written about Holland's liberation by the Canadians that I'll be short. We were overjoyed. And now the underground movement came into the open, and there was lots of work for them. This was the time for judgment, for revenge. The first job was to find the hated land watchers. These were the Dutchmen who collaborated with the Germans. They were considered traitors. It was not difficult to catch them, for they were well known, and everyone assisted in the hunt. And now things happen that will teach us much. The underground unit was all together in a building. Also present were several land watchers and Nazi sympathizers. They were treated roughly and slapped around. Then the commander handed Opa a billy club and said, "Here, Ring, give this guy a good licking for what they did to your brother." You don't know what's growing in the soil of adversity until the moment arrives when character is actually tested, because character isn't truly tested until adversity is actually experienced. But Opa could not do that to a defenseless man. Someone else took his place and the man was beaten up soundly. He got what he deserved, some will say, and that may be so, but I am glad that Opa refused to do it. You see how people all over the world have the same mentality, and in the right or wrong position, they will act accordingly. Sometimes you can't see what's growing in the soil of adversity until the time of harvest has arrived. Khitri had a Jesus take the wheel moment this past winter. I showed you pictures of the car not that long ago. A head-on collision on KGB. A gal coming from the other direction by the ball fields got caught in the grooves and spun out on the ice and came into Khitri's lane, and there was nothing she could do. Khitri and all 3 of my girls were in the car. I was there just minutes after the accident happened, and we went to the emergency room together. And while we were in the emergency room, Khitri made a comment about how, "I wish I had prayed when we were about to have the accident." To which one of my girls said, "Mom, you did. You said, 'Lord, help us!'" Which is a prayer. In Luke chapter 6, verse 45, the good person out of the good treasure of his heart produces good, and the evil person out of the evil of his heart produces evil. For out of the abundance of the heart, Khitri's mouth speaks. What's on the inside will show up on the outside at some point because character shows up in time. What's been being nurtured internally, the way you've viewed the world, the way you've chosen to respond to experiences, it's only a matter of time. Sometimes it's a short time, sometimes it's a long time, but character always shows up in time. Job is a man who has lost everything. Like, I know it's not necessarily comforting, but when you read the account of Job's life, you have to find yourself saying, wow, maybe it's not as bad as it could be. Job has lost everything. His children, his home, he has lost everything in terms of his possessions, and now he has lost his health. He is covered with boils, sores. He is sitting in a pile of ash and scraping himself with a piece of pottery just to bring some level of comfort. He's lost it all. And in Job chapter 2, verse 8, Job scraped his skin with a piece of broken pottery as he sat among the ashes. His wife said to him, "Are you still trying to maintain your integrity? Curse God and die." But Job replied, "God, why didn't you take her?" That's not what he said. But Job replied, "You talk like a foolish woman. Should we accept only good things from the hand of God and never anything bad?" So in all this, Job said nothing wrong. It literally says, in all this, Job did not sin. Don't get me wrong, Job has lots of questions, and he has lots of emotion. He has lots of things to ask God, to express to God, to defend himself before his friends. But in all of that, what shows up is a man of integrity and trust. He believes fundamentally that God is good, even in the face of great loss and suffering. The truth is, our problems aren't usually the problem. Our perspective is. It's the way that we choose to see them. We can agree that there are varying degrees of pain and suffering, right? Not all experiences are created equal, and it can actually be insulting to say that they are. It's like the teenager talking with someone who has experienced adultery and now their marriage has completely fallen apart and they are divorced, and the teenager says, "Yeah, I broke up with my boyfriend one time." Right? It's not the same. There are degrees of pain and suffering that we experience. The death of a pet is not the same as the suicide of a friend, and it can be insulting to describe them as the same thing. But we can also agree that how we experience pain and suffering can be very subjective. In fact, the experience that one person has may be equal to the experience of another, even though the depth of the loss would not be viewed as the same. But I'm actually more interested not in our responses to pain or our experiences with them, but how we allow them to shape us. The filter that we look at it through. Why do some people become angry and embittered, and others in an exact same situation become more compassionate and gracious? And it has everything to do with our perspective, the filter that we see the world through. In the early 1900s, George M. Stratton, an American psychologist, developed an experiment that has actually become quite popular, and you can buy these goggles online now. But the experiment was to take a pair of goggles and flip the image coming into your brain upside down. The upside down goggles. You can buy them. It's hilarious to watch someone put them on. There are lots of videos on YouTube, way better than cat videos. You can watch people put these on and try and do everyday tasks with the world flipped upside down. All of the spatial recognition, they don't know if their hand is going up or down. It is hilarious. Some of the best ones are trying to ride bikes because they involve pain. But here's the thing. He made the goggles, he put the goggles on, and after about 4 or 5 days, his brain began to flip the image. The world began to make sense to him through this new perspective. In fact, it got to the point where he could jump on a bicycle and ride a bicycle just like normal. He could do all of the normal things. But here's the crazy part. While that took 5 to 7 days to happen, when he took the goggles off, everything was wrong again. You would think you could just take them off and everything would go back to normal, but no, that's not the case. He would take the goggles off, and now he had to relearn everything all over again. But this time, it only took about 2 hours. Because he had been conditioned his entire life to see the world in this way, and it was rather easy to revert back to what was familiar. The world wasn't actually any different for him, but his perspective shifted because of the filter he was looking through. Which brings me to, you got to fight for your right, period. We tend to believe, particularly as Americans, that we're fully entitled to everything we desire. That because of where we live and who we are, we have the right to whatever we want. You're entitled to your comfort, you're entitled to your prosperity, you're entitled to your personal preferences in worship, you're entitled to whatever it is that you desire. And then we're told, primarily through social media, that there is someone out there attempting to rob you of all of it. And here's the kicker. It doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on, both groups are told the same thing. It's called trolling, just in case you're being baited. But it's rooted in the belief that I have the right to everything that I desire personally, so therefore I will fight for those rights. And so what you and I are told is now fight for your rights, fight for your privileges, fight for your power, fight for your possessions. And then we open our Bibles. And we read things like this in Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 through 8. Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourself. No. That's a recipe for disaster in your life if you think of others as better than yourself. Think of yourself as better than others, and I'll give you a participation trophy if you do that. Think of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interest, but take an interest in others too. You must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. Though he was God, he did not think equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. Don't you like how that was put in the category of, he just doesn't get any worse than this. He was one of us. Born as a human being, when he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. Hear me clearly. I am not saying that there aren't some things that are worth fighting for and even worth dying for. But I am saying that we are not citizens of our country first. We are first and foremost citizens of the kingdom of heaven. And the things that you and I find worth fighting for here and now better be the same kind of things Jesus came and died for then and there. So next time you're ready to jump into that fight about whatever it is, how many rounds you should be able to have in your AR, and I think we should be able to have a bunch, but that's just my opinion, and I'm going to vote that way. But the next time you're ready to jump into that battle, pause for a moment and ask the question, am I about to engage in a way that Jesus would engage? who did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but laid aside his divinity and served. Is this something Jesus died for? And if it is, bring it on. Let's debate it. Let's discuss it. But first and foremost, I'm a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. And I'm an ambassador here on earth. It's an important distinction. And it doesn't mean I don't think we live in the best country in the world, way better than England and Canada. I don't know why I pointed over here, Julia and Dale. Which brings me to bad attitude. Bad attitude is actually a pilot joke. You have T-shirts that are made up and they have some sort of slogan or logo like this on them. What you're looking at here is a gauge inside of an airplane. And just so you know, this isn't good if you see it, unless maybe you're a fighter pilot running from a MiG or something. But the blue is the sky, right? And you see the little bubble on the bottom, the level. That's not good either. And the reality is that this tells you if you're seeing things correctly. When I was taking flight lessons in Oklahoma, which doesn't have any mountains, in Oklahoma, my flight instructor was required to put me under the hood, is what it's called. And so they put a helmet on you, and it would block all of your field of view except for your instruments. And what they wanted to know is, could you read your instruments and fly the plane no matter how you felt like things were going? That when the horizon was eliminated, could you trust your instrumentation? Now, I know what you're thinking. That's easy. I played this game on the computer. I'm telling you, when you're in an airplane and that thing is pitching and yawing and you're turning, the things inside your ears that are rolling around, those little things inside the fibers in there, get all whacked out. And you are certain that you are banking to the right and you may actually be banking to the left. You're certain that you're going up, but you may actually be going down. And when you can't see the horizon, when you can't get the right perspective, there's only one thing to do. Trust the instruments. When you and I find ourselves in the fog of pain and loss and suffering, there is only one thing to do. Trust God's character. In fact, it's the only thing that makes a difference for Job. It's interesting because Job is a man who has lost everything, and he's not afraid to ask questions. His friends all show up and they tell him that he must be sinning. He must have rebelled against God in some way, or God wouldn't be bringing all this punishment on him. And Job's like, no, I know that isn't the case. I know what my God is like. This can't be true. And he tells them about who he's been in the world. And then he has all kinds of questions for God for chapter after chapter after chapter. And it's as though God is just being silent on the whole matter. And then God speaks up. I've always viewed God's response as like God comes and he says, who is this that questions knowledge without wisdom? Who is this that questions me and my authority and my power? And then he says, gird up your loins like a man. Like, buckle up, buttercup. I've got some questions for you. And then chapter after chapter after chapter, God asks rhetorical questions and describes his majesty and his power. Where were you when I created the world, O questioning man? Where were you when the goats gave birth in the mountains this morning? Where were you when I told the rain to fall on the earth and when I brought the drought? Where were you when the deer had her fawn? Where were you when I created the stars and they sang for joy at my presence? Where were you, Job? And I found myself reading through that and like, ease up a little. Like the guy's lost everything. Why would you respond in this way? And it wasn't until a few years ago when I recognized exactly what God was doing for Job. And I recognized it in the way that Job responds when God gets all finished with everything that he has to say. And Job says this in Job 42, verses 1 through 6. Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have declared that which I did not understand, things too wonderful for me which I did not know. Hear now, and I will speak. I will ask you, and you instruct me. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now, in the midst of my loss, in the midst of my suffering, in the midst of my pain, now my eye sees you. Therefore I retract and I repent. This word repent that's used here is most often interpreted as a form of comfort or comforted in dust and ashes. God could have answered Job's question, why? You know what the answer would have been? Well, because Satan was roaming the earth and came into my throne room. And while he was in my throne room, he let me know that nobody would stay faithful and loyal to me. And I said, oh yeah? What about Job? And so I gave him permission to take everything from you. And then he said, well, he only serves you because he still has his health. You can't kill him, but you can make him miserable in his health. And God just explained that interaction to Job, and Job would have been like, oh, okay. No! Like, that would not have sufficed. It would have created 1,000 more questions. The one thing Job needs to know, and the one thing God is telling Job, is that God doesn't miss a thing. He sees every bit of it. He knows every loss, every hurt, every pain, every wound, and He's present and He cares. He is not absent or distant. If He sees the goats in the mountains, and if He knows when the rain is going to fall in the desert, He knows exactly what is going on with you. Hold fast. I've got you. And the one thing Job needs to know in the midst of inevitable suffering in life is that God cares. It's why the ministry of presence is so important in pastoral ministry. Because if you're anything like me, when somebody's going through great loss and grief, you don't have a clue what to say. And the beauty is, you don't have to say anything. You just have to be present. And that's what God is doing for Job. Job, I'm here. Right here. The question is not whether we will suffer in this broken world. The question is, how will we choose to respond when we do? One of my favorite passages is found in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Paul, who has experienced his share of suffering and loss, describes it in this way. We are pressed on every side by troubles, but we're not crushed. We are perplexed, but not driven to despair. We are hunted down, but never abandoned by God. We get knocked down, but we are not destroyed. Through suffering, our bodies continue to share in the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be seen in our bodies. In verse 15, all of this is for your benefit. As God's grace reaches more and more people, there will be great thanksgiving, and God will receive more and more glory. That is why we never give up. Though our bodies are dying, our spirits are being renewed every day. For our present troubles are small and won't last very long. Yet they produce for us a glory that vastly outweighs them and will last forever. So we don't look at the troubles we can see now. Rather, we fix our gaze on things that cannot be seen. For the things we see now will soon be gone, but the things we cannot see will last forever. It's within reason that this present season you're in is a setup for future success and glory, if you would choose to see it as such. Which raises the question, what's worth investing my short life in now that will produce life and joy forever? Which brings me to the last thing. They're watching. Hebrews chapter 11, the hero hall of faith. It's a list of people who are these extraordinary people in the Scriptures. What you really discover when you read through that list is they're actually just ordinary people who had great faith, but they also had some issues. And what you discover as you read through that list in this hero's hall of faith is that eventually the author says, I've run out of time. I can't tell you all of it. And here's what he says in Hebrews 11, verse 32. How much more do I need to say? It would take too long to recount the stories of the faith of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and all the prophets. By faith, these people overthrew kingdoms, ruled with justice, and received what God had promised them. They shut the mouths of lions, quenched the flames of fire, and escaped death by the edge of the sword. Their weakness was turned to strength. They became strong in battle and put whole armies to flight. Women received their loved ones back again from the dead. Man, I like that group. Like that group, they rule kingdoms, they establish thrones, they receive what God has promised them. Wait a minute. In order to have the mouths of lions shut, you would have to be in the den of lions. In order to escape the edge of the sword, you would have to be in the sword's harm's way. In order to be in those positions, but still, that sounds like victory to me. And then there's this word I've grown to hate in the Bible. It says, but others were tortured, refusing to turn from God in order to be set free. They placed their hope in a better life after the resurrection. Some were jeered at and their backs were cut open with whips. Others were chained in prison. Some died by stoning. Some were sawed in half, and others were killed with the sword. Some went about wearing sheep skins and goats, destitute and oppressed and mistreated. They were too good for this world, wandering over deserts and mountains, hiding in caves and holes in the ground. All these people earned a good reputation because of their faith, yet none of them received all that God had promised. For God had something better in mind for us, so that they would not reach perfection without us. I'm telling you, there are people in both groups. And both of them are loved by God. And both of them have great faith. And the question is, whichever group you find yourself in, at whatever season of life, how will you choose to see? How will you view hurts, wounds, and losses? And is there a harvest coming based on the way that you view it? He goes on to say that all these who went before us are like surrounding us still. Hebrews 12:1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up, and let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. That's the perspective, that you were created more than for these few moments on this big ball of dirt. Life is a blink and a breath and it's over. You were created to live an eternity with God. It's an eternal perspective of a good God who wants to accomplish something not only in but through you also. And so we set aside every weight and all of the sin that holds us back, and we just fix our eyes on Jesus. Philippians 2, Jesus. And we run and don't lose heart.
Thank you for listening. For more of our podcasts and to discover how you can connect, visit us at churchak.org or download our Church on the Rock AK app from either iTunes or Google Play.